All right, guys, we're gonna try a picture on this. Get everybody one, please. All right, guys, pictures up. Roll sound. Count speed.
Camera speed. 2. Awesome. Take 2.
Action.
Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome to a new episode of Behind the Lens. I am super excited to be here today to tell you about our guest, Mr. Jamie Nash, critically acclaimed screenwriter. He's done work for Lionsgate, Nickelodeon. He's published a number of family books as well, and I believe focuses in the horror and family genres of entertainment. But I'll let him introduce himself. And so, Jamie, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Yeah, whenever I give my intro, I keep it short, so I keep it short. Yeah, I'm generally a screenwriter, like you said, horror and family mostly, but I write everything. I've written biopics and all kinds of stuff, and I've been doing that for a while. And lately I've been doing a lot of work for Save the Cat, and I wrote 2 books: Save the Cat Writes for TV and the Save the Cat Beat Sheet Workbook. So they're my 2 big things. But I've done comic books, and I've done theme park experiences, and every other kind of writing you could possibly imagine.
So horror and family, explain that. Children's books, yet horror films. I that's a very interesting dichotomy there.
Yeah, it's funny because when I work with the horror people, like the horror people is really where I got my start. And when I tell them I wrote the kid stuff, they look at me weird. And then when I tell the family people I write horror stuff, they look at me weird. So I kind of get it from both ends. The funny thing is, I've never met any of the people that work in the family business, like my Nickelodeon, Disney, those kind of people. They don't watch horror. Like I still haven't found anybody that likes horror movies in that group. You'd figure there'd be one that ended up in family, but they liked horror movies anyway. But they're always like, no, I don't watch those. I wouldn't know. So sometimes the horror folks have kids or something, so they'll have seen my work. But yeah, the way I got into it, it's kind of convoluted. I'll give you the really short story. When I first started, I thought I was going to be a comedy writer. That's what I really wanted to do at first. And I started to write comedy. And then after I wrote about 10 screenplays, I was like, well, this comedy thing, I'm not as funny as the funniest comedy guys. But I looked at the movies I loved, which were like horror movies and Steven Spielberg movies and things like that from the 80s. And I started to write those. And I found I was like the funniest writer in the horror space or something like that was kind of where I found myself. So I started to write a lot of horror comedy, and I got a lot of notice for that. And not necessarily jobs, but, meetings and agents and managers through horror comedy. And that's really when I started to, my professional career started to take shape. But the truth of the matter is not too many people want horror comedy. It's not like a big box office extravaganza. Like you can only think of a couple horror comedies that have made like $50 million or more. There's very few. I mean,
would Scream fall into that category? I mean, I know there's obviously some funny lines in that movie, but is it considered technically a horror comedy?
I don't think people technically think it is, but I think that's a good pool. I mean, that's a good reference. Like kind of Goosebumps kind of stuff or something like that.
Right.
Goosebumps comes to mind.
Yeah. So I translated to that really well. And I think at the end of the day, I really wanted to make movies like, and I really haven't gotten a huge chance. The closest thing was Family, but I wanted to make movies like Ghostbusters and Men in Black and Galaxy Quest. They were kind of like, that was kind of like my natural voice. It was kind of a little funny, but you could also take them serious. Like they weren't pure comedies, but they had a lot of world building and hokum, to them. And I was allowed to do that in the family space more than I was allowed to do that in the adult comedy space. So that's kind of how I ended up doing a little bit of both. And also,
That's cool.
Yeah. And Blake Snyder. So
you met Blake and actually collaborated with him. And the interesting thing is, you actually met him before you left computer consulting. So you
Absolutely.
left computer consulting in 2008 and to become, a full-time writer, which is a really interesting I'd like you to talk about. But also that you met and collaborated with Blake Snyder, the original author of Save the Cat, before you did that. So yeah, if you can go into that story.
Yeah, no, it's a great segue because I think my first family film was written with him. He and I collaborated on a family film. It was it was before he wrote Save the Cat, and I had met him in a
Okay.
writers group, and he had read my comedy, and he was like, I need, at the time, I was probably 15 years younger than him. He was like, I need a younger guy to kind of come in here and punch up this comedy to write some jokes or something. So,
He didn't consider himself to be a comedy writer, huh?
oh, I think he was, but I think he was getting older. He just thought he needed like a young guy that was in touch with whatever the young stuff was back in 2000. or
Beyond
whatever.
dad jokes. Huh?
Yeah, exactly. Now I'm the dad joke guy. I try to find the young writer to hook me up. So yeah, he brought me in. He had this idea, and it was funny. I usually give the quick version of the story, but I'll give you the slightly longer version. He was coming off of he wrote basically the Herbie movie that Lindsay Lohan ended up doing. He had a blind script deal after Blank Check to write anything he wanted, and he said, "How about Herbie Goes to NASCAR?" And they were like, "Yes." And he wrote that. He was very excited about it. That was going to be like his big thing. And they hired writers to completely rewrite it to the point where he wouldn't get credit. And I think he was a little bummed about that. So his idea that he came to me with was basically, it wasn't Herbie, but this is how I'll pitch it. It was Herbie Goes to Fast and the Furious was basically what he wanted to do. So we wrote a movie called Repossessed, and you can imagine where that's going. And and we never shopped it or anything, but during that time, he was using all his Save the Cat terminology and things like that. And he was like formulating his book at the time, but he didn't tell me. So when we wrote it, I just assumed that this was all Hollywood jargon that everybody in Hollywood used. But it was really his secret, method that he was kind of coming up with to write the Save the Cat books.
Wow.
STC software or an actual corkboard and cards? What's your preference? Because I know that there's a religious debate regarding this, and for those of you who are not familiar with Save the Cat is really, if you will, a structure, and Jamie's probably the best person to explain this, but a structure in how you actually write a screenplay or a novel or any of the number of Save the Cat books that it's been rewritten for. So there's 15 beats, 3-act structure, and I know that the Save the Cat book obviously, teaches, setting up a board and using pin cards, and but there's also Save the Cat software. What is your like, what camp do you fall in as far as digital or just physical analog cards?
Yeah, well, I have my answer literally right here, and this wasn't planned, but here are my cards.
This was not planned.
Yeah,
not planned.
the funny thing is, I think I threw away my corkboard a few years ago just because the pins and stuff. So I just kind of lay them out in front of me, or for me, I like to shuffle through them. Like I like to kind of go through and be like, okay, this scene happens, then this scene happens, and then just go over it really fast, and it's almost like pitching it to myself, and then I'll stop and I'll be like, oh, that's not so good, and I'll kind of go back and rewrite it.
So you're definitely more of an analog guy.
Mm-hmm.
You like to write things down. You like to touch it in your hands. But does it? One of the things that one of the complaints from the opposite side of the aisle on this is it's really difficult to collaborate, right? When it's not in digital form. How have you gone? Just address those challenges.
That's a good point. So I would say I don't always do cards in the analog sense. Sometimes I've gotten to the point now where I will just write one, and I'll just do it in Microsoft Word. I'll write the first scene, and then I'll put a bullet underneath it that might be conflict and emotional change in the scene, or something. Like I'll put certain bullets underneath my scene, but I'll just do like a numbered list of 40 beats, essentially. 40. They're not really scenes, they're not really beats, but there's something, because some of them are sequences.
Points, if you will.
Yeah. There's some wiggle room in there. So I will just open up a Microsoft Word, or very often a Google Docs if I'm collaborating, and I'll just write it that way. And it's often a little messy. In fact, I was doing this morning. I was doing this exact thing this morning, where I had my 40 numbered list. And I was going through and working on it this morning. And I wouldn't want to show that to anybody. I could show it to a collaborator, maybe. But it is a little messy when I do it. I'm constantly cutting back and forth. I just tend not to use the software. I've had the software over the years. I mean, the Save the Cat people are good friends of mine. And, I've seen their software, and I get asked questions about their software, which I usually say, I don't know anything about the software. I can't really help you. But Yeah, to me, the more simple, the better. But some people want the more complex, and
Right.
the software has other things around it. It's like if you ever go into novels, there's a program called Scrivener, and Scrivener has
Yeah.
all these different ways to like compile chapters and volumes and take notes and do note cards and all stuff. And I got it, and I'm like, I'm just using this like Microsoft Word, so I'm just going to use Microsoft Word or Pages or
So you
something.
feel it's like apps are kind of over engineering something that you should try and keep as simple as
Yeah,
possible.
I mean, and different strokes for different folks. I know there was a time when new toys would make writing fun for me. So if I got the new program, it would just, it would loosen something up for me and make things a little more fun. So I get that part of it, but for me, after doing it as long as I've done it and doing it over time, I'm more simple. I'm like, what's the most basic thing I can use? But
Right.
the reason I like cards sometimes, like I said, I'm about 50-50 on cards. Sometimes I'll use Microsoft Word, sometimes I'll use cards. But the cards get me away from the computer. And that's what I like about cards because I'm on the computer all day, So just to get away from it and have something I can take in the car or something, sit there when I'm
Yeah.
grocery shopping, and in the parking lot, I'll just be writing or something. Um,
Now,
it's nice.
clearly, you've worked on, big budget stuff. You worked with Miramax, Nickelodeon. Obviously, I'm sure there have been many times where you've been in the writer's room. Has that sort of over time really become more digital versus the cards, or do you
No,
still see writing rooms still using cards?
yeah, on features, they never get to the card level or anything like that. They might ask for a
Oh, wow.
treatment. Sometimes they might ask for a beat outline. Like I guess maybe
Right.
on when they do like Marvel stuff or something, maybe they have more of a writer's room scenario. But TV, they still use cards. I mean, after
Uh,
COVID, they kind of had to go digital. But if you go to any writer's room that's in person, or if you went before COVID, they were still using these things and tacking them up to the board and
oh,
stuff like
wow.
that. And in fact, I've talked to the Save the Cat people. Some of their orders, when they get celebrity orders, and celebrities are like the writer celebrities, like, oh, such and such just ordered like 500 cards. They'll literally order these cards, these Save the Cat cards,
Oh, wow.
and
And
use
you
them.
you use the actual say that you don't go to like Office Max and buy cards. You actually use the STC ones.
No, I do usually use the boring ones.
Okay.
It's the only thing that Save the Cat does, they pre-print a couple things on there for you.
Okay.
They're nice to
I
have.
think they put like hints, right? They get that for
Hmm.
those who are new to screenwriting, they'll explain the particular beat, right? There's like hints on
Exactly.
it.
They're
Yeah.
fun. Exactly. It's that toy aspect. Sometimes it's fun to
Yeah.
use the new toy and it looks all pretty. Um, but in general, they don't really buy it. I shouldn't. They'll get mad at me for saying they won't really. But I can understand why you might want the toy, and there are a lot of celebrity writers out there that are buying them
That's
Right.
too. So
yeah.
it's all
So
good.
now you've probably heard this before, Jamie. The whole argument from folks that feel that Save the Cat is too formulaic. What's your response to that? That it's just too rigid, too formulaic. And obviously there's different approaches to screenwriting. Why Save the Cat for you, and what's your response to that argument?
Yeah, yeah, and for me, it's So I do have a slightly different approach to Save the Cat, and especially if you read my TV book.
Right.
I'm not as rigid with Save the Cat as Save the Cat was. So I'm not, Blake, when he originally wrote that book, he was like, the catalyst is page 12. It's page 12. Don't argue with me. He kind of had this snarky, sarcastic way of his tone, which me knowing him, knew he was kind of joking at the same time. He was like, come on, quit arguing. Why
Right.
are we wasting our time with this? Just do it. Put it on page 12. You're trying to break the rules and write a bad script. So just put it on page 12 and make it easy on yourself. But people kind of took it. I think some people, when they read that, they take it. When you write something, it's hard to really know what the person's like. And especially Blake Snyder died in 2008, 2009. So there hasn't been a lot of video on him. I think if people knew his personality and stuff,
Mhm.
those kind
Yeah.
of concerns would go away a little bit. But
Cool.
but the formulaic aspects of it, um, I used to kind of listen to hear who was using Save the Cat, and there are a bunch of people that I've been contacted by that use Save the Cat that are professional screenwriters. that are very popular and much more successful than me. And they've contacted me in the past, and they've used it. But when I used to listen, the two that I remember in the last decade, and these go back a little ways, was like How to Train Your Dragon was a Save the Cat, developed kind of story that Blake even worked on. And then I remember listening to an interview of Dallas Buyers Club that used Save the Cat to generate their story. And if you look at those and put them side by side and say, oh, they're both using the same formula, Dallas Buyers Club and How to Train Your Dragon, I'm like, the creativity goes between the beats. The beats really aren't where the creativity lies. And after all these years, I'm a screenwriting teacher. I teach on the college level. I'm a screenplay consultant. I honestly can say I've never read a script where I said, this thing has way too much Save the Cat in it. It's, oh my gosh. It's always, always, always the opposite. It's, it's just a big mess. It's slow paced. It's whatever. And Save the Cat is just a language to kind of help you out to fix those problems, I think, or to kind of design around them from the beginning. But I've never in my life, I honestly have never read a screenplay where I said, the reason I don't like this, you did everything right, but it just follows those exact same beats too closely. I've never once read a script that I had that complaint.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I guess people watch like Marvel movies and stuff, and they think they're all kind of similar. They have similar beats. But here's my other rebuttal to the formulaic Save the Cat thing, because they kind of, if you were to go on Twitter or something, they'd be like, oh, those Marvel movies have gone Save the Cat. They're not good, or something like that. They're all too Save the Cat. But the reality is, I'm like Mr. Save the Cat. I wish Hollywood had gone Save the Cat, because I could raise my hand and say, I know it better than anybody. Bring me in. But the reality is, I've never had it come up on a phone in a meeting, like ever. Wow. And I'm the Save the Cat guy. You
literally wrote the book on
I mean, series. Blake Snyder's the Save the Cat guy. But right now, as far as a meeting goes in Hollywood, you can't get closer to it than me. And nobody's ever brought it up. And in fact, when I wrote my book, I think I sent it to my agent. He didn't know what it was. He was like, what is this?
Wow.
And he works for a major agency. And I was on who Christopher Lockhart is, Inside Pitch. He's a major agency story development executive or whatever. I don't know what his title is exactly, but he's story development for a major agency. And he had me on his Inside Pitch. He interviews people. And he said he had never read it, so he was curious. So the idea that it's somehow pervasive and everybody's using it and stuff like that is a little
quite the contrary.
It's not exactly true. Now, I will say, as young people come in, because colleges use it and things like that, they probably have been exposed to it, and maybe it'll change. Maybe that'll start, really percolating in. But because I do every now and then now, I hear people throw in, while they don't bring up Save the Cat in general, they might use the language of it. They might say All Is Lost moment or Dark Night of the Soul moment. But it's very rare that they say that in conjunction with, and the fun and games beat and the midpoint and the break into three. I wish I've literally, I've been doing this full time since like 2009. I don't think I've had a single meeting, job, anything where Save the Cat was pushed at me at all.
Wow.
Yeah. So I don't really see it. So anyway, that's where I think it's more an outside looking in kind of thing. And as far as new writers, there's so many problems with screenplays before you get to, I wrote the perfect Save the Cat screenplay, and that's a problem that I don't know. I just don't buy it. I've never seen I've never seen a script where I was like, this screenplay is perfectly written except for Save the Cat. I don't really buy it.
So for the people in our audience who aren't aware, Blake Snyder wrote the original book, Save the Cat.
Right.
And Jamie authored Save the Cat Writes for TV. Now, the reason for that is that the original Save the Cat was written for feature-length films.
Mm-hmm.
And being able to take, a 90-minute movie, for example, and break it out into these 15 beats. And what was amazing about Jamie's book, and it's funny, the way I was introduced to you was I originally, so at Night Studios, we have produced 5 TV series, we have 3 in pre-production, and in every series, I was always constantly trying to figure out how to fit Blake Snyder's 15 Beats into a single show,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Into a single TV show, which is really, really challenging,
Mm-hmm.
which is why I'm sure it was the impetus for you writing your book as a spinoff to the original Save the Cat. What was sort of, and I apologize, Mel, I'm stealing this question from you,
Sure.
but what was the, I guess, for you in your approach to writing for TV? Is it even possible to do 15 beats in a single show, or do you always do it across an entire like 10 episode season?
Mm-hmm. So if you read my book, it basically, I say it's wonky is the term I use, because you can, television has a lot of freedom to do whatever you want to do.
Yeah.
So and the way I came about kind of the process that I use in the book, which is heavily based in Save the Cat, but there's the question, your question was the exact question I was trying to answer with the book. Can Save the Cat be used for writing television? And I was teaching college, and I would teach a Save the Cat course. I mean, I was teaching a Save the Cat course for a few years. And more as streaming was becoming popular, students were coming to me and saying, can I write a pilot in this class? And I kind of was like, I don't know if you can write a pilot in this class. And I wrote pilots using Save the Cat, me personally. But I knew, I also taught like a short film class. And similar to short film, I have used Save the Cat to write short films, but I know that's not the only way to do it. You know, it's not, and not even maybe the best way to do it. But if you want a certain type of short film, like I wrote a anthology film. I wrote one anthology for this movie called VHS 2. And I use Save the Cat for it. I mean, if you watch it, you can see an opening image, a setup, a catalyst, a debate. They just happen really fast, you know, over the course of 15, 16 minutes. And that's how I wrote TV pilots as well. So yeah, my answer to you is, yes, you can have 15 beats in an episode. It depends on the type of show. So if it's an episodic show, if you're writing a CSI or something like that, you know, if you're...
Yeah, that's what, we do procedural crime dramas, so like the FBI, CSI kind of stuff.
I think they can have 15 beats easily. Like, they're the shows that can definitely have 15 beats in them. I think all pilots should have 15 beats in them if you're a new screenwriter and you're trying to break in. I think you should do the whole beat sheet. There is, when I say it gets wonky, and this is very minutia, but I know you're kind of into the minutia of Save the Cat and stuff like that. But the one revelation I had, the biggest revelation I had about pilots when I was thinking about the book and mulling it over, and I was really struggling. I was like, is this just a lie? Can Save the Cat really be used for TV, or does 90% of the cases it not work? But the one big revelation I had was, you can end a TV episode early. So you can end a TV episode, and when I say early, I think it has to end at the All Is Lost or the break into three, the break into three. Because what happens at the break into three beat in Save the Cat is the hero goes through this All Is Lost moment. They kind of have the soul searching, but then some inspiration or some new idea comes up, and they go and they execute that plan. That plan is the rest of the season, or it's episode 2 or something like that. It's not the finale.
Okay.
Got it.
You know, so
Got it.
that was my biggest like wow moment when I was kind of thinking of the book. I was like, you know what? Because there were so many shows when I was analyzing them, I was like, oh, this show doesn't conform. And then once I figured that part out, they all conformed. Almost all the pilots conformed.
Oh.
So that's the one big caveat. So maybe you have like 2 less beats. Maybe you have 13 beats. And then there's other things like about character arc and stuff like that don't apply in the same way. You can't arc a character in every episode or anything like that. You can take mini steps. You can learn lessons. I have a thing I call the whiff of change. There's like in a pilot episode, characters usually go through something very personal, and the idea of change is in the air in a pilot, oftentimes. But you can't, you couldn't arc a character in every episode. It would just be like the most
Oh yeah, that'd
wild
be
character of all time.
yeah. We
Because,
usually do it
yeah,
like throughout the
you can do it
season. You
throughout the
get
season.
little peeks into that character's life at home and stuff like
Yeah,
that.
yeah. So, but
Yeah.
the reason I think new writers should do it for pilots is it for one thing, you want your pilot to be a pitch. Your pilot is really a pitch for a show, but it's also a pitch for you as a screenwriter. So if you somehow write there are shows out there, first episodes, that don't do 15 beats. There are shows that are just set up. I always forget the title of this, and I always say this. If you go back through interviews with me, Mayor of Easttown, what's the one with Kate Winslet? Did you ever watch that show?
No.
There was a show with Kate Winslet where she's like a small town detective, and I'm going to spoil the pilot just a little bit for you. It's basically all set up. The whole thing is a setup. It's her it's her life, it's her friends, it's her family, it's her relationships. She's the local sheriff. That's all it is. And in the very, very last scene, you realize there's a murder that's happened.
Oh.
So it really is just a setup. I don't recommend, and it's a great show. It's well written. It's perfect. I don't recommend that for original writers trying to break in, because if you sent that script in like by itself, people would still be a little confused as to what the show is. They'd be like, I don't know what this is.
Yeah.
Is it a drama? Is it I don't know. So because you really want to show that you can tell stories, that you can tell these kinds of stories, you have to tell those kinds of stories in your pilot. You have to have your pilot be a microcosm of the overall type of show you're telling. So that's why I personally, my pitch, my strong belief is, as a new writer who is really using pilots to break in, you really should tell a complete story in your pilot that's part of an overall series.
Wow, that's good.
Got it. Don't overly focus on one specific beat or break any rules if you're a new writer. Don't go out trying to break the rules of STC, but actually try and stick to that sort of structure, that rigid structure, and when you're writing your first set of screenplays.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, and that kind of piggybacks to a question I have is, what are the most top 3 things to keep in mind when writing a pilot?
Yeah. One is that kind of microcosm, make it a microcosm of your show. So if it's like a show about space or something, you have to get the space in your pilot, and you should really do it early. You should, if your show is a sci-fi show, you shouldn't wait to the very end to get to the sci-fi part. That's really dangerous. Or if it's a detective show, you shouldn't wait till the murder happens at the end of the show. It really needs to be a microcosm. And a lot of people tell too little story in their pilots. I've heard a lot of jokes about this, where people say you go to the network meeting, and my joke is, this isn't really a joke. Like, the thing, when I consult with people, a lot of times I look at their pilots and I see the end and I say that should be your midpoint, and I'm like, move it back.
So it's in the wrong order.
Yeah,
it's
like you're not telling enough story. You're just shuffling your feet and getting to the end. And the joke I've seen, the showrunners and stuff say, is they go to the network, and the network goes, you see that thing that happens in episode 6? That should be your pilot. So they really want a lot of story crammed into that first episode, because your pilot is a pitch. That's one of the most important things to remember, that your pilot is a pitch. And the second point that I always like to say is, a pilot is also a pitch of you. So it has to be you on a plate in some ways. There has to be something about you in that thing that really differentiates it. And this could be because of your backgrounds, you're writing about something that you know. This could be just your distinct voice and comedy. But it has to be something. It could be your theme, the theme of the overall show. There has to be something that's you on a plate. TV, even more than features, really needs you in that script, because most of these pilots, and this is the other thing to keep in mind, will never be made, but they will be your writing sample to get on a show. So,
Good
so
point.
It ends up being more of a portfolio of your work versus actually getting produced.
yes, and that's why you really need you on there because they want to hire somebody with a unique point of view and voice to fill out their room, you know? So you have to show that on the page. That's your chance to say, here's who I am, here's why I'm valuable to your room.
So in your experience, you've done, obviously been your website, you as you mentioned, you offer consulting to screenwriters, you'll review screenplays, give feedback. In your experience and how long you've been doing this, what is a big reason behind people having beats out of order or writing to a completely wrong to a beat? Is it a lack of understanding of those beats? What's kind of been your experience as far as how that ends up happening, where they think they're writing to Dark Night of the Soul, but it ends up being, completely different or not what's expected at that beat? Is it just a lack of understanding for writers on what is meant for those specific beats?
You know, that is like an excellent question. I wish I had an answer why. I don't know the why. Like it's such
Okay.
a good question too. I've never had anybody ask me that, but the why is so interesting. And I talked to some other writer friends about that, and it's just some kind of complete misunderstanding of, I ultimately I think it comes down to it's just much harder than it looks, right?
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
really hard to comprehend what's going on, and it seems so easy, right? It seems so
Yeah.
easy, but something about it is really hard. Um, but to your point, like when I first started and I come from a computer programmer background, and when I first started to do this, I was instinctually pretty good at it, I would say. I think just out of the gate, for whatever reason, this was one of the few things in my life that I sort of got without really struggling. You know, it was one of the
Right.
few things, probably the only thing in my life that I kind of was like out of the gate. I wrote an okay screenplay, which is better than some people do. But I used to be on this website called American Zoetrope. And American Zoetrope was this early, you kind of could swap screenplays. It's still around, but nobody uses it, I
Wow.
don't think. Francis Ford Coppola made it for writers, and you could swap screenplays and review each other's screenplays if you were a new
Oh, it's
screenwriter.
like a
Oh,
social network for
that's cool.
It
screenwriters.
was. It was. It was in the late '90s, early 2000s, and it was how I got started. I went on that site, and I almost wrote for that site. You know, how some people write for
Oh,
contests nowadays. They're like, "Well, I can't wait to
yeah.
get it out to the contest." Well, back then I was like, "I can't wait to get it on the site." Sometimes the top reviewed he would option and stuff like that. It was really cool. It was a really cool thing. Um, but anyway, I read a ton of screenplays, and I learned more from the bad screenplays than anything because what it would be, I'll give you an example. It would be like somebody would write a script and you wouldn't know what it was about. It would just keep going and going. And you're going to be like, somewhere the story's going to start and more characters would be coming, more situations, more things. And it just would keep going and going. And you'd be on page 40 and you'd be like, what is this story about? And I didn't have the language. Now I do. I'd be like, there's no catalyst.
Yeah, you'd refer to a specific beat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, what I realized now is I was reading something that was all set up. They just set up. And they never had a catalyst. They never had a break into. And then some stories, maybe the catalyst would come on page 60 or 70, and it would only be 100 pages long, and it'd be all rushed.
Yeah.
I have no idea why. That's the part I can't answer is the why. But I know that's a real thing. Is like,
Yeah, it's interesting because look at the countless books now that have been written on STC and the numerous websites and blogs that are written on each individual beat. I've read your book. I also purchased the audiobook and I listened to the audiobook, and it's funny. The interesting thing here is when I'm writing, despite feeling like I know your book from front to back, I'll get to a beat and like, oh, let me read that. Let me read about this
mhm,
beat again
mhm.
in Jamie's book because even having read it, like still having to crack the book open and reread what your explanation is on that beat. I mean, still to this day after so. I don't know. It's interesting. It's an interesting
it's
thing
very
to hear
interesting.
that, there's so many challenges for
And
screenwriters out there and sticking to the beats and
you're right. I
filmmakers
mean,
might not.
I've been in writers groups where people said, I followed the Save the Cat beats, and they start listing them, and I'm like, yeah, that's not your catalyst. No, and it's like that's not it.
It's
You
the
know,
catalyst, but it's
yeah, they
not.
think
Yeah.
it's the catalyst. I'm like, yeah, that's not it. I'm like, this is the catalyst, and they're like, really? And I'm like,
Oh,
yeah,
funny.
that's the catalyst. It happens all
Do you
the
think
time.
do you think it's Do you think it just comes with experience? The number of screenplays that you write, you start to get it and figure it out, and
Like
it's just
I,
lack of experience.
I think with experience it can be learned. That's the one thing I like
Yeah.
about teaching structure and stuff like that.
Mhm.
It is the
Yeah.
one thing I do think can be taught with experience,
Yeah.
with analysis. The problem is, I think some people when they read the book, they'll use it to justify their bad decisions as opposed to use it. I
Ah,
always
okay.
say the book works best. Like I don't think the book works great. I mean, it works okay as an analysis tool. Like if you go,
Mhm.
oh, Save the Cat doesn't work on Rocky or something like that. I don't think that's where it shines. I think where it shines is I have an idea for a story. The book is my co-writer. It's
Mm.
pulling ideas out of me. What would the setup be? Oh, it would be that, I hear the 5 things that are needed in a setup. Let me think about those. It's like having somebody in the room asking you questions. Well, what happens when the story starts? That's the catalyst. How do they go from the ordinary world to the story world? And I think that's where it functions best. But I do think there are
That's
some
cool.
people. I've met people that have stories already, and they kind of apply the Save the Cat after the fact. Like they'll
Oh,
yeah they'll
interesting.
write
They
their
try and layer it onto and conform it to it after it's
yeah, and they'll
written.
be like, oh, it fits perfectly, and I'm like, no, it doesn't. It doesn't fit. Yeah.
I did I've done several videos on STC, and it's funny. I always like to use the analogy of, climbing Mount Everest and how you don't just start from the bottom of Everest and walk all the way up. To me, the top of Mount Everest is your completed screenplay, and every base
Mm.
camp along the way while climbing Everest to
Mm-hmm.
get to the
Yeah.
top are your individual 15
That's
beats.
good. That's good.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, that's the way. Like Mel, I know I've
No, it's
totally
great. I'm like getting all
hijacked
this
the interview.
education. Yeah, switching tracks a little bit, when a writer is, and this is, how do writers create that compelling character that makes the audience root for them, right? And sometimes you have several favorite characters in this stuff, but I think the story arc are the most compelling things to wanting to get that binge worthy, either on a film or on a part one, part two, on a series or episodic, TV series. Like, what do you recommend to writers doing that today?
Yeah. So, and it's a really good question. And honestly, when I write a script, I'm pretty good now with the Save the Cat stuff. And I've always been an okay idea guy. Like I can generate lots of twists and plot and all that kind of stuff. Character is usually the thing that it keeps me up at night. You know what I mean? Because it's one of the hardest things to get to. And other people are great at character. They're instinctually great at character. But for me, it's always the thing. It's like the first thing I worry about and the last thing I worry about. Like it's the thing that never ends. Like I'm constantly tweaking the characters and things like that. And I think some people are great with character and less great with plot. So because of that, I developed a lot of like tools to help me out. Like, I needed the tools even more than I needed the Save the Cat beat sheet. I need
Wow.
these tools. Like that's what I need because instinctually that wasn't the obvious thing for me. So in my book, I have 3 of those tools that I use. One of them's pure Blake Snyder, so it's not mine, it's his. He basically says the big 3, the first 3 things you have to come up with. And by the way, Blake Snyder's book is a little light on character. It's not, it kind of hints at it a little bit, but it doesn't give you like specific tools or things like that.
Right.
Yeah, there aren't much ingredients in there on how to
There's
develop
not a
character
ton.
arc.
There's not a ton. So his first one though is very useful, and I always start with this: is what's the character's flaw? What's the thing that's messing them up? How are they seeing the world wrongly, making bad decisions, things like that? What's the need? The need is the thing that fixes the flaw, and then what's the want? And what the want is kind of a goal that they have or something they want based on the flaw. So it's a flawed way of thinking. So they think money will cure everything, but they need to know love will cure everything. Something like that. A real simple version of it. And then he has a thing called the shard of glass, which is the origin story of the flaw. Like, why is that person flawed? And coming up with those in advance is really important. So that establishes your character arc. And I think those are really good things to think about. And when I collaborate with people, I'm always like, what's the flaw? What's the need? What's the one? And we always kind of start with that. But some of the extra things I came up with, one thing you mentioned, like, why do we like characters, or why do we, follow them? And Save the Cat, the term, is kind of his one thing that he uses, right? It's like, this character can be a horrible person, but if they save a little kitty cat, we'll follow them. And the Save the Cat moment is that it's some nice, other side that maybe only we get to see as the audience, but everybody else doesn't get to see. We get to see that this person's a good person. But for my book, because TV is all about character. So if, every meeting I'd go to in the television space, they'd sit you down and say, look, TV's character, character, character. And that's all it's about, character. That's what keeps people coming back over and over, because they grow to love these characters and they need it. So I came up with some tools for that that kind of expand the Save the Cat thing. And the thing, I call it a rooting resume. So it's a reasons we'll root for them, even if they're despicable. And I recently did one. I did a breakdown of Succession and Barry for the Save the Cat website. People can go and take a look at that. It's in their blog section. Because both of those characters, well, all the characters in Succession are like horrible people, but for some reason we keep watching that show. And really the basis of the rooting resume is it's not just a Save the Cat moment. There's usually some aspect that they're massive underdogs. And in Succession, you'd be like, how are they underdogs? But in a certain way they are, because it's hard for them to get to the top where they want to go. There's so many things against them. But they're usually massive underdogs. There's usually some level of disrespect. The world disrespects them. The people around them disrespect them. There's some kind of victimization or something. Sometimes they can have disabilities of some sort. Whatever makes them underdogs that will cheer for them is a big help. But then there's other things, like if you watch like Bill Murray movies where he doesn't get much these things at all. He doesn't get Save the Cat. He'll kick the cat usually, Bill Murray. But there's something about if you're just funny or charming or attractive or something like that, we tend to, now sometimes that can work against you, but a lot of times, those things will actually work for your character. So I'm a big proponent of figuring those things out and approaching your setup. Your setup should just be delivering those by the ton. You should have. There's a movie that I always point to is Joker, the movie Joker. And if you watch that movie, that is the most unlikable character. He's kind of weird. He's not very charming. But if you watch that movie, he's constantly. It's got about 12 rooting resumes or even more. I think we counted like 15 or 20 in the first 10 minutes. You just go through it and it's like, oh, okay, the kids beat him up and steal his sign. The people at work make fun of him. He takes care of his mom. He tries to smile at a kid and the mother of the kid yells at him to mind his own business. He has a disability. He has this, and it's just like 20 things they just hit you with over and over in that section. So rooting resume is a big tool that I think helps with that.
That's great.
So, it's interesting. I don't know if you saw Schitt's Creek, but it was one of Mel and I's favorite TV series. And they did a BTS interview with Daniel Levy and some of the other folks on the show. And I remember Daniel talking in the interview about how important character development was, especially for his father. And he talked about how, they'd gotten them, but Daniel just wanted to go right to writing the screenplay. Like, let's just do it. Let's write the screenplay. And his father kept telling him, no, we need to know who these characters are. We need to really know who each individual character is. And I thought about that when you mentioned how in TV that's just so important and
Hmm.
almost more important than the plot, and
Absolutely.
what's happening. That that's why you keep turning on the TV every to see what they're up to and what they're doing, and each individual person. Like that's one of the things I love about character development is it's interesting, don't you think, how in a household you can have two people, a lot of the same interests. Mel and I have a lot of the same interests. We do a lot of the same things together, enjoy doing a lot of the same things, right? And yet we'll be watching a TV show and she'll fall in love with a particular character that I won't like, and I'll fall in love with a particular character that she doesn't
Yeah.
like. And I think a lot of what you're saying, it has to do with how we as individuals kind of see ourselves in the characters on a cast,
Yeah.
and making sure that when you're developing characters that you develop them to the faults or things to root for that we find in ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's that point. Have you ever had a show go off the air and you feel kind of sad? Um,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's the goal, right? If you can,
Yeah.
it's like these are friends or family that you see every week in your house.
Yeah.
And you look forward to seeing them. And then when they're gone, it's almost like a small death in some ways, And I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
I think that's the goal, is if you can make people kind of sad that they will never see that person again that they liked. That's
Yeah.
kind of the weird, twisted goal of it all. And I think in comedy, like Schitt's Creek, you mentioned, it's even more important to think of characters because, I mean, it's important everywhere, but they're also comedy engines.
Right.
It's their unique point of view, their flaws, their all those things that creates the comedy. And so if you're going to be funny, a lot of times when I do consult on comedies, that's what's missing. They come and they write kind of
Hmm.
funny lines. I'm like, you really haven't thought of these characters. They're all kind of the same, and
They focused on the
that's
one-liners
right.
instead of the
It
individuals
might be
delivering them.
pop culture references or stuff like that. But
Right.
really,
Right.
comedy comes from the characters. Like that's when you get in the characters, and they're just funny in some way. Like I once heard somebody say that what they always like to come up with is, how is this person funny in I'm trying to remember what it is, a grocery store, a checkout line, a wedding, and a funeral. And if they can figure that out, then they know they're on the right track. So
That's great. You want to ask a lot? I know we're running up on time, so I want to make sure we're being respectful.
So
I think I'll ask one more question and then Alyssa will ask another. Um, how can writers balance the needs of the network or streaming service and not really sacrifice their own creative vision? I think that's so powerful too, because you have a vision as a writer, and then you're also having to meet the needs of the network.
it kind of depends on what those needs are, really. I would say it's easier now than it was back then, because there's that question's much more different if you say the broadcast network. So if
Okay.
it's
yeah, because I mean, it's almost like two different discussions about
hmm
the old
Yeah.
linear TV days to now with streaming.
yep, yep.
Sorry, that's the emoji thing with Mac now. But let's try that again without the balloons. Look, it's inarguable that there's a transition happening within television from linear TV days to streaming.
hmm hmm
So it's almost two different discussions. But yeah, I would love to get your input on that and how that's being affected.
Yeah, and I think linear TV, so the big networks, the ABCs and stuff like that, um, you kind of this is my take on it. You kind of are beholden to their needs, like in a much
Hmm.
Right.
bigger way than maybe you are in the streaming. But I mean, streaming also has its needs and notes and things like that. Um, so it's tricky to say, how do you keep your creative vision, because they really are they really tend to be the bosses. There's not a lot you can do if they want to enact like some kind of huge change or something like that. Um, there's very little you can do if they have big notes like that. You are constantly beholden to them. But the good news is, really, it's the showrunner that's usually the buffer of that. And
Hmm.
showrunners tend to be very powerful people in their own right. They tend to have multiple deals, and the network doesn't want to anger them. So it's usually them that are buffering kind of, you know, what gets to the writer's room, what gets to the creative, what gets to the thinking within the show. As far as like a new writer, if you think you're writing for broadcast, like broadcast TV, ABC, CBS, those kind of things, there might be some concessions you make, but and I think we can all understand what they are. They're not quite as edgy. Some of those shows are a little bit more on the nose and have more clarity to them. They have less ambiguity, things like that. There's just a certain type of show they make. And if you think you're writing that, so if you are writing procedurals and stuff like that, you may want to just really know the type of shows that yours are similar to and try to write, in somewhat the same bounds.
Plagiarism is the best flattery.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. I mean, they kind of have the rules. You can get what the rules are by watching those shows. You can get where the boundaries are.
Right.
You can get where to press. If you're writing for streaming, I wouldn't worry about their needs so much because their needs are constantly changing. It just, things are always becoming different. So
Based on the numbers.
yeah. So if you're a new writer, I wouldn't worry so much about that. And I was even talking to somebody recently who was writing for they weren't sure. They asked me, they said, do you think I should write this for broadcast or should I write this for streaming? And I don't know. My opinion was I'd write it. I told them in their particular case, I was like, I think you should just I said, you could do two versions. You could just scale back one because theirs was right in the line of whether it should be one thing or another. But there's two sides of me. The big home run is in broadcast. Like that's where they get the multiple episode orders and the big money and stuff like that. But I was like, I think if you write it for streamers, and this might be totally wrong. So this is just my opinion. But the broadcast people might say, oh, this is kind of edgy. We'd like this on our network. And they change it all. But at least you wouldn't, like the streamer people would be interested in the edgier version. And I think the broadcast people might like the edgier version and then tone it down to meet their network.
And end up with a completely different screenplay when it all
Right. By the end of the note cycle, it would probably change completely. But this is just my personal strategy, and it might be the wrong strategy, by the way. So I don't necessarily advocate this, but my personal strategy was write for the streamer and let the broadcast people think it's kind of cool. I had an experience like that. I wrote a script called Santa Hunters that was a spec script that I wrote it kind of as a Goonies. It was Blair Witch meets Santa Claus is how I pitched it.
Oh, wow.
And
Wow.
and I wrote it. I wouldn't say edgy. I mean, it was for kids, but it was done in kind of the 80s style that I liked, and it was 100% found footage and kind of in that way, like a Blair Witch Project. And Nickelodeon got it and said, "This is the most perfect script. This is the best script we've had come from the outside ever." And I was like, "Oh, okay." And I think it was because of that edginess and stuff like that. And they ended up buying it and having me rewrite it and take off some of that edge and turn it more into a Nickelodeon project. But I think that's where my philosophy comes from. I think when the edgy thing lands at the kind of less edgy place, they like it. They're like, "This is kind of cool. This is kind of scary. Let's do this."
Yeah. What's your? I guess final question is, what's your advice for aspiring writers? What's the best advice that you can give them?
That's a great question too. And it's one I get asked a lot, and I'm never really sure how to answer it because there's so many different angles I can take. The one thing is, I'll give two pieces of advice that I commonly give. One is that nobody can ever answer the question, how do you break in? How do you get a career? Because what I always say, it's like asking somebody who just won the lottery, how do I win the lottery? It's like,
right. It's hard to answer that.
I can't really say because it's a lot of timing meets luck, meets ability, meets, all this stuff mixes, and it's impossible. And everybody has their own origin story. So it's impossible. I can point you in a direction, but mostly my big thing is I point you in all directions. I say try them all because you never know which one's going to go. And it's definitely not going to ever go the way you think it's going to go. It's going to be something else, something odd.
I always say life is what happens while you're planning other things.
Absolutely. So that'd be one piece of advice. And then the other piece of advice that I tend to give, and this is more an observation, but everybody I know that's done this full time, that's still in it, that makes the money, that they eventually broke into a career and made a living out of it. They all have a certain relentlessness to them. And by the way, I'm not like I'm not super outgoing or anything like that, but there is an inner relentlessness to me. Like if you were here with me, you'd be like, oh my, this guy never stops. He just keeps, he's trying all these angles. He's hustling in a lot of different directions, and you wouldn't really guess that if you knew me. And some of my friends, like they come off as aloof, they come off as lazy. But I know secretly they have this relentlessness that they are trying all angles. They're up late in a Saturday night thinking up another angle. They meet somebody, they follow it up. They are just relentless. So there's a certain amount of tenacity that, everybody has their own way of bringing that tenacity. But there's two things that come with that tenacity. One is it's going to take a long time to break in, to get money. And that's part of the relentlessness. And it's just going to take constant, buying lottery tickets, making opportunities, and keep trying. But
put as many fishing poles in the water as possible, and you'll eventually increase your odds of getting a fish.
Yeah, I almost think, and it's not like I've met enough Hollywood celebrities or anything, or writers or things like that. But I've met enough writers and producers that they all share that certain hustling aspect to them that you wouldn't expect from the outside. When you meet your favorite celebrity, like if you meet Steven Spielberg or something like that, you'd probably be like, oh, he's a nice kind of guy and he's kind of thoughtful. But I bet you on the inside, he's spinning 50 plates. He's trying to do 10 different projects, and it kind of shows. He's attaching to all these things. He's reading all the scripts. He's watching all the movies. He's taking all the meetings. And you'd be like, oh, that guy, no, he can do whatever he wants. I bet you anything, he's a wild hustler in some ways. So.
It reminds me of a meme that was floating around on Instagram. Is you only really see everyone's wins, you only really see their successes, but you don't see all the work it took them to get there.
Absolutely.
And people think that wins just happen like that without all the elbow grease.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yep. I mean, I have probably 10 hustles I did already this morning. So, it's just it's just the way it goes. And
that's amazing.
So that would be my biggest advice is try to get that engine going.
Hustle.
And if you're not a person that does that normally, and I think this is part of the reason why people, they say, hey, can you do anything else? Well, then do that. Because I think most of the people that are hustlers like that, they have such a burning passion to do it that they can't stop trying, to get to the door. But if you don't have it, I think you can nurture it. You can give yourself goals. You can send out 10 queries. You can, I don't know, there's different things you can do. You can enter 5 contests next year. You could write an extra script next year. You can there's all kinds of ways you can nurture that hustle.
Why don't we close out with just having you tell everyone about the new book you just recently published, and kind of what's next for Jamie Nash? Is there a new version of Save the Cat coming?
There are some Save the Cat things kind of spinning, but they're not ready to announce yet. So
there's something in the works.
Yeah. By the way, I do have a Save the Cat beat board, like there's a video series. I don't know what they call it, a video webinar that I did that teaches you how to do the
I think there's
cards.
A pre-recorded. Yeah, there's a pre-recorded video that they've got that people can watch.
Yes, there's a thing out there. And a lot of the character stuff, I also you can check out in the Save the Cat beat sheet workbook. And that the beat sheet workbook is format agnostic, so if you're writing a novel, if you're writing a comic book, whatever, you can use that. My new book, I also write a lot of middle grade kids books. I wrote a YA book once as well, but my new book is called Monster Stompers, and it's very similar to, like I said, the kind of thing I love to write. It's basically like Ghostbusters with Godzilla, kind of thing. But it's about a bunch of kids who build a giant robot out of like junkyard parts to combat a monster, giant monster problem in their small town. It's out there. Go check it out. It's on Amazon is probably the easiest way to find it.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, how can people reach you if they either want to hire you to consult on some work they've done, or what's the best way for people to
Yeah,
reach you?
so my website is the best place for that, and it's jamienash.net. If you Google Jamie Nash screenwriter or something, you'll find it.
Come on.
But yeah, I have a page for that. It's funny, I don't advertise that a lot. Not that I mind advertising it. It's kind of a thing I just started to do because so many people were asking me for it. So I was like, okay, I'll put a page
Right.
up. But I enjoy doing it, and I do script consulting. So I'll read your script and give you notes. Usually a Zoom call is how I like to do it. I like to kind of work with you. And I also do kind of coaching. Like if you have an idea and you want to work through the process, I'll do that as
Cool.
well.
I think we need to bring
Yeah,
Jamie in
that'd be awesome.
and work on the new version. Our franchise Dark Ops just got picked up for a new season.
Oh, wow.
So we'd love to work with you on that and just continue to work with you. But it's been a real pleasure having you on
Thank
the show
you
today.
so much.
It's meant a lot for
Yeah.
both of us as huge fans of you and your work, and we're looking forward to more.
Yeah, well, thanks for asking me. It was a lot of fun.
Thanks, Jamie.
Thanks, Jamie.